Hi,
Hello.
Georgie, maybe you can introduce yourself shortly.
Yeah, so my name's Georgia Scott, and I'm an Australian composer. I have a disability as well, and this often informs my practice and the music that I write because I think it's important to share my lived experience through my music and also advocate for people with disability through my music.
And what is or what are your disabilities?
So I have cerebral palsy, so that affects my fine and gross motor skills, and it's on the right side of my body. And I also have a vision impairment in my right eye, and this affects my vision and also my depth perception as well.
And uh, do your disabilities impact your creative work as well?
Yeah, they do. I think for me, so obviously when anything's part of your identity, it's going to inform your work and your practice, but also just practically, because I do have some difficulty with my fine and gross motor skills. This means that things just take me a little bit longer sometimes. So that means that I have to factor that in when I'm writing work. So I just leave myself a little more time. I often just take projects that allow me some extra lead-in time. So I have the time to do things like format my parts and scores, just those practical sides of the creative process that take me a little bit longer because of my disability.
Yes, and maybe are there some new things which you discover or learn
Yeah.
your disability?
Absolutely. So I think one of the main things I've learned from having a disability is just what an amazing community of artists there are out there with disability. So I've really been able to make some wonderful connections with people who have disability. And also, I'm not naturally someone who's a very good leader or advocate. That's not my usual personality. But I think having a disability has given me the opportunity to advocate for people and to have to advocate sometimes, even though that's not naturally who I am, because I want to make sure that artists can have the access that they need. So that has kind of shaped me as a person in that way too, whereas maybe I wouldn't have had to stand up and advocate in the same way if I hadn't had a disability.
Yes, and has your disability somehow affected or shaped your music as well?
I think for me, it's really central to the music that I write. I think it's really important to engage audiences with topics that they might kind of find slightly uncomfortable. And I think for me, because I think that's kind of part of what creation is bringing people into spaces that they might not have been in before. And I think music is a great way to do that because it provides a tool where you can explore these topics without some of the connotations that come with language. So I think sometimes language is quite loaded and can make people put up barriers and walls. And I think with music, you can break down those barriers and really bring people into your lived experience. So I think for me, especially, I wrote a chamber opera a couple of years ago called Her Dark Marauder. And this was a work that I really wanted to explore the kind of roles given to people with disability on stage and question those roles. I think so often the roles that people are given in kind of stage work and also in books and in fairy tales, all of the literature and stage work we see often has these roles of people with disability as physical disability being a manifestation of an evil soul. So
Yes.
there's things like Captain Hook in Peter Pan, and he's this kind of evil character that has a hook as a hand because it's a manifestation of who he is as a villain. So I think I wanted to really question that for a start and show the power and unique experience that can come from living with a disability. So I think in my work, there's often in theatre works, there are these tropes that are kind of put upon characters with disability who, because the audience members are often uncomfortable having a character with disability on the stage. So Playwrights without disability will often try and kill a character with disability. So that happens also to Captain Hook. He gets killed, or the character will be cured. So something like the musical Wicked, there's the character of Nessa Rose, and she's given the ruby slippers to cure her because it's uncomfortable and pitiable to have her on stage in the state that she is naturally in. And so, and the other thing I think often on stage and just in general, characters and people with disability are used as inspiration. So they're kind of wheeled out, we're kind of treated as, oh, isn't this wonderful? This person with disability is doing this very mundane thing. You should do better yourself as someone without a disability, because look at what this person with a disability can do, rather than just seeing them as people who are seeing us as people who are just living our lives and doing what we do. Rather than acting as inspiration for someone else. So I think in my work, Her Dark Marauder, I really wanted to question these tropes. So I had each of the sections were based on these tropes. So my characters were killed, and then they were cured, and then they were finally used as inspiration. And I really wanted to show in this work the power of that character pushing through, despite having these tropes put upon them. They were able to fight against society and still just be true to themselves and not have to give in to each of these tropes. And I think that was a way that I really wanted to explore deeply what it means to be someone with a disability in society. And I think so often people don't have a disability, they're disabled by society, that kind of social model of disability, which means that if the whole world had ramps and things, then people in a wheelchair wouldn't be disabled, because society would have changed in order to accommodate them, and they would no longer be considered as disabled. So I really wanted to kind of explore the way that people with disability can advocate for ourselves and fight back as well against society kind of disabling us in that way.
Got it. And maybe are there some musical things, right, which completely other musical things or ideas which you think you discover for yourself due to your disabilities, right? Which somehow this disability provide me for you some kind of unique experience for composer, from which you maybe have some other ideas in music.
Yeah, I think my compositional style really changed as well when I wrote that particular work, because I was deeply exploring kind of disability. I really wanted to have this idea of being musically in the work. It's kind of starts off with the idea of just breath and breathing as at the beginning of the work, when before we had kind of labels put upon us by society, and then later in the work. So this idea of the breath moves through that work the whole time, but then later the breath becomes almost forced upon the characters by the outside instrumentation. And so in that, particularly in the curing section as well, is you're almost having your breath forced upon you by someone telling you you need to change and this will make you better. And there are points in the instrumentation where the melodic lines move inwards and then squeeze the vocal lines into a very small range. And so it's kind of this musical oppression by society that comes in through the instrumentation as well. So I think that was something that I really wanted to explore. So I suppose it's not so much something that I learned from having a disability in terms of the way I write, but it's something that I wanted to use the music itself to express that feeling of being disabled by society.
In what way your disability shaped your composer career?
In which way does it shape my me as a composer? Or
yes, you as a composer and your career.
I think mainly, I suppose mainly I think it just shapes who I am as a person, so then that shapes what I write. But I think mainly it's more kind of what I was saying before in terms of the practicality of the composition rather than, and I think it probably has shaped my musical language, but I've had a disability since I was born. So I think I don't know who I would be without my disability. So it's kind of hard to say whether things had changed. Whereas I think if I had acquired a disability later in life, I might be able to see a more stark difference between composition before and after.
Got it. Got it. And how do you imagine music world more accessible?
I think, well, there's so many ways. I think, yeah, making sure that, that we make sure the stage is accessible, as well as just making sure the audience is accessible, because I think that so often, we're not able to, artists aren't able to access the stage when they have a disability. So they're able to access the audience. A lot of theatres think about how you will be able to access the audience as someone with a disability, but we need to be able to have role models on the stage for people who have disability to be able to see change, and for people with disability to be able to share their stories on the stage. And so we need to make sure the stage is accessible for a start. We also need to make sure that we're really thinking about how we can embed access into organizations in the music industry from the foundations, rather than just retrofitting access into organizations. So doing things like making sure that in your contract as an artist with a disability, you're asked, do you have any access needs? How can we accommodate your access needs, rather than this being kind of said as an afterthought as a music organization. I think when putting on concerts, I think it's really important to think about access as a whole, rather than just thinking about access at a concert, but thinking about how can you make the journey to the concert accessible. So like thinking about public transport for people who have disability, things like that, thinking about people with different sensory needs. So not just thinking about physical access to a concert or to any sort of musical performance, but thinking about if people are neurodivergent and they have sensory needs, making sure you have a sensory space for artists to go to be able to recalibrate if they're feeling overwhelmed, making sure that you're thinking about access needs in terms of when you're putting on a concert, all of the marketing materials being accessible. So is your website accessible? Are people able to read your website with a screen reader? Are they able to do all the images on your social media and website have captions on them that can be read by a screen reader? Can people with low vision read? Have you got a sans serif font, and have you got good contrast on all of your materials? So just those sorts of things as well, just all the practical aspects around accessibility, rather than just thinking about one concert and making sure that it has physical access, but just that every other access need is thought about, and this is just embedded into every concert that's put on, rather than it being a special concert that is accessible for people who need it, but all of those other concerts might not be. So just incorporating those sorts of things as well is, I think it's really important in terms of a first step for access in the music industry for artists as well.
Yes, got it. Let's imagine, right, that there is an ensemble of musicians, right, who has your disability.
Yeah.
And what would be the principles? What should be used when you're composing pieces for them, right? For such people, what would be?
Yeah, I think the thing for me as well, especially with cerebral palsy, is it's so different. Everyone is quite different in the way in their strengths and in their access needs. So I think the most important thing, I think, for me, if I was working with people with cerebral palsy, would be to just go and listen to exactly what they say they need, and really work closely and collaboratively with those people, just because everyone is so different, and I think it would be hard to write a specific list because you wouldn't want to assume what people needed because it might not fit what's helpful for them. So I think, yeah, the main thing for me with working with people with disability is just really listening to them, and then taking that feedback and incorporating it into the work that you're writing, so it showcases their strengths.
And does new music have a role to make our music landscape more accessible? And if this is a role, what it could be? Right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think new music is the perfect medium to explore this because it is so experimental. And I think the sorts of people that go and see new music concerts are really open to exploring new and sometimes challenging things. I think often new music has been used to advocate for different things in the past. And I think it's a really great medium to advocate for people with disability because it is so experimental, and it creates quite a new safe space to be able to explore these sorts of topics. So absolutely. And I think, I mean, the great thing about new music is it makes people think about things in new ways. That's the whole aim of new music, really, is to challenge people to think in a different way. And so I think my aim in writing new music would just be to hope that people go home and think about something in a new way, and that they've challenged their biases and hopefully changed some of their thought patterns and maybe kind of destigmatized disability a little bit.
Thank you very much for our interview.
It's great to speak with you.